All right, so recently I was asking for followers on this YouTube channel, and I didn't really give an explanation as to why. So one of my friends, who is also a former Brit Lit student of mine, was inquiring yesterday on Christmas what was the purpose of this. She was hoping that I was going to be making some Brit Lit videos, and I told her no, I was actually getting followers because we'll be live streaming a celebration of life service coming up this weekend. But that led to a conversation where I kind of started talking to her and her boyfriend about some of my favorite pieces to teach back when I was a Brit Lit teacher, and just kind of planted a seed that kind of got me excited. And so we're going to try it. We'll see how this goes. With the events going on in our family, with the celebration of life service that's coming up this weekend, I was reflecting on John Donne. John Donne is one of my favorite poets. John Donne and William Blake are the two that really, really mean a lot to me when it comes to British literature. So I'm going to read from John Donne's Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions, For Whom the Bell Tolls. A very famous piece. Many people have heard various parts of this piece, but they don't know where it comes from. John Donne was no stranger to grief. John Donne was a man who, as a young man, he loved women passionately and wrote great pieces like The Flea, a great poem to teach. And then he fell in love with a woman and loved her passionately and gave his full devotion to her. And then when she died, he fell in love with God and loved God passionately. And as you follow his work, it reflects all of those different chapters in his life. As he's reflecting upon the death of his wife and grief, he writes this piece. Perchance he for whom this bell tolls may be so ill that he knows not that it tolls for him. And perchance I may think myself so much better than I am, as that they who are about me and see my state may have caused to toll for me, and I know not that. When the death bell tolls, and of course I think of Monty Python's Bring Out Your Dead, I'm not dead yet. But when the death bell tolls, if you're asking who it's tolling for, be careful, because you might find out that you're so sick that they've called it for you and you're delusional and you don't even know that you're dying. He goes on to say the church is Catholic, universal. So are all her actions. All that she does belongs to all. So when we say that the church is Catholic, the word Catholic means universal. I don't know if you know that, but that is the root of the word. That's why in the Apostles' Creed, it talks about the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was the church. It was the Christian church for over 1,000 years. If you were a Christian, you were Catholic. If you were Catholic, you were a Christian. And so when you look at classic texts and they talk about the Catholic Church, realize it's talking about the universal Christian church. When she, talking about the church, when she baptizes a child, that action concerns me, for that child is thereby connected to that head, which is my head too, and engrafted into that body, whereof I am a member. So every time somebody is brought into the church, he says, it impacts the entire body of Christ, the entire body of the church. And when she buries a man, that action concerns me. All mankind is of one author, and is of one volume. But when one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. So not only is the body increased whenever someone is baptized into the church, but when the church buries somebody, the entire body feels it. He also goes on to explain how death is like, it's not a chapter being torn out of the book, but it's a chapter being translated into a greater volume. And so he's looking at death as a translation. So then the analogy goes on. God employs several translators. Some pieces are translated by age, some by sickness, some by war, some by justice. But God's hand is in every translation, and his hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves again for the library where every book shall lie open to one author. Regardless of your perspectives on faith and life after death, it's a beautiful analogy. I'm going to skip a few lines and go down to some of the more famous pieces here, famous lines. He says, no man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Some of us have struggled with feeling isolated, feeling alone, feeling cut off from the people we care about, feeling cut off and left alone. And what John Donne says here is that if a little, I think of the beach, every little piece of sand that washes away with the tide diminishes the continent. On some minuscule level, the continent is smaller and is decreased by that piece of sand or that clod of dirt. So every human being is a part of mankind. And when any person dies, it diminishes all mankind because we are all part of the greater mankind. We are all part of that continent. And so when a clod of dirt, when a single individual who seems isolated and alone is washed away, it's as significant as when a promontory is washed away. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Every time somebody dies, a part of us dies. And you may have experienced at some point in time shared grief or grief or sorrow for the loss of someone that you don't even know. Maybe you see on the news, oftentimes when you see great tragedy, we are moved emotionally. You may know someone who's grieving and you feel the grief. As a school teacher, unfortunately, we've had several students who have died over the years. And I would see students who never even met the student who died grieving. And it can be confusing to some. But what John Donne is pointing out here is that any man's death diminishes us. We are all impacted and affected by one man's death or one woman's death because we are all a part of the whole. Neither can we call this a begging of misery or a borrowing of misery, as though we were not miserable enough of ourselves, but must fetch in more from the next house, and taking upon us the misery of our neighbors. Truly, it were an inexcusable covetousness if we did. For affliction is a treasure, and scarce any man hath enough of it. Now here's a paradox. Affliction is a treasure. How is affliction a treasure? How is grief and pain and sorrow a treasure? How can we grant those things as making us stronger? No man hath affliction enough that is not matured and ripened by it, and made fit and made fit for God by that affliction. To me, this makes me think of those of you who know me, you know that I lost my mother when I was 8 years old. And in my late teenage years, I realized that if I could go back in time and take back the death of my mother, I couldn't do it. As much as I yearn for her, I long to see her, I miss her embrace, as much as I wish she was with me through the various tragedies and joys of my life. If she hadn't died when I was 8 years old, I wouldn't be the person that I am today. And once I decided that I like the person that I am, I realized I couldn't be me without that sorrow, without that affliction as treasure. If a man carry treasure in bullion or in a wedge of gold and have none coined into current monies, his treasure will not defray him as he travels. Tribulation is treasure in the nature of itself, but it is not current money in the use of it, except we get nearer and nearer our home heaven by it. Another man may be sick too, and sick to death, and this affliction may lie in his bowels as gold in a mine, and be of no use to him. But this bell that tells me of his affliction digs out and applies that gold to me, if by this consideration of another man's danger, I take mine own into contemplation, and so secure myself by making my resources to my God, who is our only security. Again, regardless of faith, regardless of your perceptions of the spirit world and the supernatural, regardless of if you consider yourself a believer in the God that John Donne is talking about, anytime somebody dies, we as mankind and as individuals have the opportunity to take the consideration of that person's death and think about our own life and our own frailty in life and how we can then make ourselves stronger and make our lives more significant and make sure that we are loving and giving. John Donne is specifically talking about faith in Christ and having your security in eternal salvation. What I'm talking about is understanding that we are mortal and we won't last forever. I realized as a young father, um, my greatest fear became, what if when I die at my funeral, my kids, my personal children, stand up and say, he was a really good teacher and he was an okay dad. And that became, for me, the reason to focus on my kids. Yes, I want to be a teacher. Yes, I want to impact young people's lives. Yes, I want to make a difference in lives. But if I do that at the cost of loving my own children, then I have failed. Um, and so that keeps me focused on loving my children. I also want to share a couple of sonnets with you that John Donne wrote. These are his holy sonnets. These are his divine meditations. Again, at this point, he is a priest, and he is reflecting on the frailty of life and the injustice, unfairness of death. So, holy sonnet number 3, he says, "This is my play's last scene. Here heavens appoint my pilgrimage's last mile, and my race, idly yet quickly run, hath this last pace. My span's last inch, my minute's last point, and gluttonous death will instantly unjoint my body and soul, and I shall sleep a space, but my ever-waking part shall see that face whose fear already shakes my every joint. Then then as my soul to heaven her first seat takes flight, an earth-born body in the earth shall dwell, so fall my sins, that all may have their right to wear their bread and would press me to hell. Impute me righteous, thus purged of evil, for thus I leave the world, the flesh, the devil." My favorite line in this when he says, and gluttonous death will instantly unjoint my body and soul. That imagery and that personification is just incredible. Holy sonnet number 6 starts with an apostrophe, not the punctuation mark. "Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure then from thee, much more must flow, and soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, king, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell. And poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than thy stroke. Why swellest thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die." I love that. Death, why are you pompous? Why are you proud? You are a slave to fate. Death, you are a slave to war. Death, you are a slave to poison, to chance, to kings, to sickness, to desperate men. And we can impersonate death through sleep, and we can impersonate death through poppy or different types of drugs. But you're going to be defeated when we die and then continue to live, according to John Donne's faith. Holy Sonnet number 10, he tackles the Trinity. "Batter my heart, three-person God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, O'erthrow me and bend me, your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like an usurped town to another due, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason your viceroy in me should defend, but as captive and proves weak or untrue, yet dearly I love you and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie me, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free nor chaste, except you ravish me. What a beautiful, beautiful love poem to the Christian faith and to God, begging that God ravish him and force him to love him because he cannot break his vow and his bond to sin. Um, again, whether you're a person of faith, the beauty in these lines, the passion in these lines. Excuse me. And then Holy Sonnet number 11. Wilt thou love God as he thee? Then digest, my soul, this wholesome meditation, how God the Spirit, by angels waited on in heaven, doth make his temple in thy breast. The Father having begot a Son most blessed, and still begetting, for he ne'er began, hath deigned to choose thee by adoption, co-heir to his glory and Sabbath's endless rest. And as a robbed man, which by search doth find his stolen stuff sold, must lose or buy it again, the Son of Glory came down and was slain, us whom he had made, and Satan stolen to unbind. 'Twas much that man was made like God before, but that God should be made like man much more. Okay, and if you are not a person of faith, I want to share. He's got some pretty racy poems. One of his more famous ones is a valediction forbidding mourning. Don't mourn me when I'm gone. But I have to go with The Flea. He also has a valediction of weeping. But The Flea. The Flea is one of John Donne's most famous poems, and it is quite racy when we look at him comparing a flea to the wedding bed. The flea. Mark but this flea, and mark in this, how little that which thou deniest me is. It sucked me first, and now sucks thee, and in this flea our two bloods mingled be. Though thou knowest that this cannot be said as sin, nor shame, nor loss of maidenhead, yet this enjoys before it woo, and pampered swells with one blood made of two, and this, alas, is more than we would do. If you're not following the imagery here, oh stay 3 lives and 1 flea spare, where we almost, yea, more than married are. This flea is you and I, in this our marriage bed and marriage temple is. Though parents grudge and you, we are met and cloistered in these living walls of jet, though use make you apt to kill me, let not to that self-murder added be, and sacrilege 3 sins in killing 3. I'm not going to explain. You can use your imagination. Cruel and sudden hast thou since purpled thy nail in blood of innocence? Wherein could this flea guilty be, except in that drop which is sucked from thee? Yet thou triumphest, and sayest that thou findest not that thyself, nor me the weaker now. 'Tis true. Then learn how false fears be. Just so much honor, when thou yieldest to me, will waste as this flea's death took life from thee. He's saying, if this flea took blood from you and blood from me, and inside they're mingled, our bloods have already mingled, like they would mingle in the wedding bed. So basically, we're already married. Well, what are we waiting for? So one of the things I like to point out is that modern literature and modern movies are not where things got um, dirty, and sexual. That as long as mankind has been telling stories, these types of things live on. So, anyways, hope you enjoyed that. I have a few other things I want to share with you guys. I want to share some of Shakespeare's sonnets. I definitely want to read Christina Rossetti's The Goblin Market. I may share some just of my favorite random poems. But, anyways, just wanted to give this a little shot and dedicate this to Aletha, who gave me the idea. Love you guys.